Hey everybody, Dustin Schmidt back here again. And today we're going to talk about the Canon R5C and why I still think this is one of the most phenomenal cameras that has come out in the last, several years. And why I'm still using it today after nearly 3 years and will continue to do so for hopefully many years to come. So let's get into some of the reasons why this is still a great camera and might be the right camera for you. A little bit about me if you're new here. I'm a photographer and a DP here in Oklahoma City, and I work in a lot of corporate style jobs, advertising style jobs, and I use the Canon R5C for a variety of things. It's really kind of a Swiss Army knife, I've said in other videos, of the things that it does for me in my daily work. So let's talk about some of those things and how I used it in the last year, for example. So the R5C is my main stills camera that I use for all my photo jobs. Phenomenal stills camera, basically an R5 with the addition of all the video features. So it's got 45 megapixels, it's got amazing autofocus, it's got great dynamic range, great tracking, subject tracking. Everything that you need to make it an all-around camera, the R5C can do for you. And that's how I use it as a stills camera. But I also use the R5C as one of my main video cameras. And by that, I mean that anytime I do a 2-camera interview setup, the R5C is typically my second interview angle. My A camera interview angle tends to be a C500 Mark II nowadays. And so those two Canon cameras mix well together. The R5C is also my main gimbal camera. Because of its lightweight and size, it runs really well. I have a DJI Ronin RS3 Pro, and that's the gimbal that I use it on. And I tend to just put it on with the built-in battery, and a lot of times I'll just use the flip-out screen on it because it's easier than hooking up an external monitor, things like that. And it's easy to fly around with that camera, for extended period of time without getting too tired. Easy to set up, easy to run. Again, has focus tracking, things like that. That makes it a great gimbal camera. So there's 3 different ways that I use the R5C, and really why I think its versatility is kind of unmatched. There are other cameras out there that can do some of what the R5C does. A lot of the other camera manufacturers have their R5C camera, but I don't know that any of them really do it as well as the R5C does it for me. If you look at something like a Sony FX3, amazing small lightweight camera. It's not a stills camera, it's a video camera. So I bought this camera brand new when it came out, and it cost me just over $4,500, which was the price when it first launched. And it's been through a different price fluctuations over the last couple of years, but now you can get it for way less, even if you want to buy it new or if you want to buy it used, which I do recommend buying well taken care of used equipment. There's a lot of it out there on the market. And I think at today's cost, it's almost a no-brainer for something that can do all the different things that it can do. If you only need stills and you're only a stills photographer, and you're a Canon guy, buy the Canon R5 because it's the same camera. If you even think you're going to do a hint of video, though, I think the R5C is a much better camera between those two, and I recommend going for it for all of the things that it offers, like the built-in fan, the cinema operating system, and some other things. I know there's a lot of talk on the internet, and especially in the YouTube camera space, about this camera versus that camera and what this camera's features and this other camera's features. And I like talking about that stuff, and that stuff is important. But I think equally important is just having a camera that works. As a professional who uses your camera as a tool for a living, let me talk about this camera from a professional perspective of just how many times it went out for use in 2025. So in 2025, I took this camera out on 25 different shoot days. So it was 25 days that I billed for using the Canon R5C. Sometimes it went out on strictly photo jobs, sometimes it went out on strictly video jobs, and sometimes it did double duty on a shoot where I did stills and video. So there's people that shoot many more days in a year, there's people that shoot less. For me, this camera did a tremendous job at a variety of different tasks all across 2025. It was my most used camera. I used it more than my Canon C500 Mark II, which is a video-only camera, more than Red Komodo, which I also own. That didn't work very much at all this year, just because I was using more of my Canon stuff and pairing those up together. But I don't think you can discount that from a professional perspective of using your camera to make money, which is what it's for. If you're a hobbyist, That's fine. You should buy whatever camera you want and whatever camera you can afford and not worry about some of these other things because you're not making money with it. But if it's tool, it should be out working. And so even at the high price that I paid for this camera back when I bought it of, nearly $4,600, the camera has worked steadily over the last couple of years. And so ideally that's where you want to be, right? You get your camera paid off and then the camera starts to generate revenue for you. And so I think that's, it's an incredible value proposition at this point to go get one used and use it for work because it does everything so well. And another thing with this camera has just been the reliability of the camera. I have never had an issue over the 3 years that I've used it with anything with this camera. I've never had some kind of software glitch that took it down. I've never had it overheat because it has a built-in fan when shooting video. That's a big deal on a lot of these other cameras. There's only a few other cameras out there that are hybrid cameras that have built-in fans. And that's because when you're shooting video with cameras like these, that generates a lot of heat. And you need to be able to dissipate that heat in order for your camera not to, essentially melt or something malfunction on it. What a lot of people don't realize is that the sensor of your camera needs to maintain a certain temperature in order to operate effectively. As it gets either extremely hot or extremely cold, the performance of that sensor declines. That's why you've got, cinema cameras like, Arri Alexas and things like that, where they just have gigantic fans and things on them. Keeping the temperature of that sensor maintained is important. Purely from the Canon perspective, they came out with the new R5 Mark II, which is people were excited about. I was very excited to see this camera come out because it's the newest, latest, greatest thing. And it has a lot of positive things on it that the R5C cannot do. But there's still a bunch of things that the R5C does better. You really didn't see a big jump in dynamic range on the R5 Mark II. From what I've seen from stills testing, the dynamic range is almost identical. And in fact, I think in some situations, the R5 Mark II might actually have slightly worse stills performance, even though it has faster readout, better autofocus, things like that. And a lot of that just goes to show how far we've come in terms of technology over the last couple of years with cameras. 10 years ago, there were big differences in where things were happening. Now you could really probably buy almost any camera that came out in the last 5 to 7 years, and you're going to get very similar performance. So you got to ask yourself what you really need and what your clients need. Camera companies have to make money, so they have to keep coming up with new, innovative ways to sell new products. And a lot of the things that they're coming up with, they do improve. The technology gets better in terms of autofocus, AI learning, a lot of this, certain things that they built in there. But, the most important thing that really happens behind a camera is they always say the couple inches behind the viewfinder, which is what's going on up here and what you're doing to formulate a picture. So, just buy what you can afford and what's come out, again, in the last 7 years and go buy something older and used, and you'll be just fine. But all of that being said, if you can afford the R5C and you need it for the type of work you do like I do, then it's a phenomenal, fantastic camera and value proposition here still in 2025, as you would expect. Let's talk about some of the things people did not like about the R5C when it came out and some of the stuff that they've done that kind of changed that. So big one was battery life right off the bat. The battery life was not great with the built-in little LPE6 battery. It really wasn't. It was pretty fast. As soon as you switched over to video mode, those batteries started to get sucked down, like you would not believe. In stills mode, it's fine. It runs just like a regular stills camera. No issues there. But the battery life was not amazing. They've since done some things to remedy that. And one of the things that they've done is they came out with a higher capacity, maybe not higher capacity, but it can generate more power of a little LPE6 battery. And this is the one that came out to coincide with the launch of the R5 Mark II. This battery has solved a lot of issues for people who were complaining about using the LPE6 batteries. I actually don't have any of those brand new batteries because for me, the battery life has not really been a problem. And that's mostly because if I am using the R5C as a video camera, I'm typically running power to it through the USB-C port. You can power it through the USB-C port. I tend to run a V-Lock battery that has a USB-C out into that to power it when I'm doing long interview stuff or need long run times for video. Or you can just run it to like a power bank that you can set on the ground or something like that. So it was never an issue for me, but if it's something that bothers you, you can get the new LP6 batteries and you get much longer run times. So not as much of a big deal as it used to be. The HDMI output, that still sucks. Nothing to do there. It's not the most robust of connections. You really need to use like a cable clamp. And at least what I do is I use a full-size HDMI to micro adapter, and then I clamp that in the camera and go into the full-size HDMI. And that way I don't fiddle too much with that little port that's going to be easy to break. But again, I haven't had any problems over 3 years, but I'm careful with my gear. I don't sling it around. It's not getting strapped to cars or things like that. I'm mostly using it as a stills camera and a video camera that, you know, I hold in my hands or I put on a gimbal. And so that output hasn't been a problem for me personally. Let's talk about the image quality. The image quality, I think, is very good for what this camera is. There are cameras that have better dynamic range. There are cameras that shoot more megapixels, but we're starting to get into splitting hairs with some of this stuff. I used to own a Canon C200, for example, and the raw image out of the Canon R5C, I think, is a better image than the Canon C200, which is a dedicated cinema camera. It has a bunch of different modes. Let's talk about video for a second with it. It's got an 8K raw video output. It's got a 5 and that's in full frame, by the way. It's also got a Super 35 5.9K raw, which is a great file if you want slightly smaller file sizes and also the flexibility of that raw. It's got a 4K XFAVC. I think it shoots 1082, but I've never shot it lower than that. I always shoot the 4K. If I want a smaller file size, I shoot the 4K XFAVC. I did that for a long time, and I would shoot that codec. It's a 10-bit log codec. Works great as long as you're within a couple stops. File looks great. I did not shoot the 8K RAW very much because I was editing with Premiere Pro. And recently what I've done in probably the last, 9 months or so is I'd switched over to Resolve. And the performance in Resolve with the Canon R5C RAW files is phenomenally better than Premiere Pro. And that has made all the difference in my workflow personally. So now one of the things that I do is I'll shoot RAW in my C500 Mark II. I'll shoot RAW in the R5C, and I'll run 2 RAW streams into DaVinci Resolve and do a multicam interview edit like that with a 5.9K RAW C500 II, 8K RAW R5C, and cut between those, and it works great. So I would encourage you, maybe if you're having problems with your Canon RAW files, to look at DaVinci Resolve, because Premiere Pro is just, it's not doing it. So personally, I love the image quality out of this camera. I love the colors, the Canon colors. Although with digital cameras nowadays, you can make anything look like anything as long as you record it well and you know what you're doing in post. I've used this camera on some corporate stills jobs, and I'm usually always super happy with the way the files turn out. As long as things are lit well and presented well. I love the 45 megapixels that come off of this. There's just something about having that many more. I'm not a megapixel snob. We're always racing to have, the most, but there are benefits to it. And same thing on the video side. 8K video is pretty much overkill for most of us, but there are benefits to taking that file and scaling it down. C-Log 2 versus C-Log 3. We could talk about that a little bit on the Canon R5C. The Canon R5C technically only has a C-Log 3 profile built in, and they will tell you that it doesn't really support C-Log 2. Now, a lot of times what I do with the Canon R5C is I will shoot the 8K RAW or the 5.9K Super 35 RAW, bring it into DaVinci Resolve, and just interpret that footage as C-Log 2. You will see a difference in the RAW file when you do that, in the way that, obviously it maps that. I have not found an issue doing that. It doesn't break the RAW file, it doesn't make it look at all weird. What I have found is that it matches better with the C-Log 2 out of my Canon C500 Mark II when I do that in post. So yes, it may not officially have C-Log 2. It's not a log profile you can select in the camera, but you can work with it that way in post if you prefer, and it still looks great. I want to offer up a couple thoughts in closing here. Would I buy the Canon R5C again, if I went back in time knowing what I know now? Absolutely, 100%. I would buy this camera again. It has been a phenomenal camera for me. In fact, it has been so good that I'm probably looking to pick up another Canon R5C. I'll buy one used, or when it goes down slightly more in price and I find a good deal, I'll probably pick another one up so that I have two sitting here. Because I don't think things are going to get that much better in the next couple years, where it's still not going to be a viable camera for years to come. Yes, we have newer cameras, R5 II, C80, things like that. But for a hybrid camera from Canon, the R5C still kind of exists and sits alone within its space. They don't have another camera that has a built-in fan like that shoots stills and shoots video. So it still does what it does. The R5 Mark II has the built-in fan grip on the, battery grip fan thing, but no. For me, the Canon R5C has been one of the best investments that I have made for my business in the last several years that I've used it, the last 3 years. It has went out and just performed flawlessly on multiple occasions, continues to work, and is a really great piece of kit. And there's plenty of other kit I bought that I couldn't say the same thing about. The Canon R5C is not one of those things. Is this camera still viable in X year, right? The answer is it's always viable. The most important thing, again, is the person taking the pictures, not the camera. And one of the things I've actually noticed lately is a resurgence in this interest in old cameras, and people buying these old cameras, going out to shoot with them, and then going, wow, did you know this camera was this good? Like, look at how good it still does in 2025, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, because the cameras are all very good and have been for many years now. So if you are lusting after a camera that you cannot afford, I get it. It's a little bit natural, but please don't. Just buy something that you can afford. Go out and make pictures with it. And that is the most important thing. So hopefully this video was helpful to you. You learned a few things about the Canon R5C. And if anything, I would tell you that go out and shoot with what you have. If you can buy an R5C, I think it's a great camera. I think you should get one if you want one. And that's what I got. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.